Hey everybody, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, October 10th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film writers Hoai-Tran
Hey everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
So we got a bunch of news today. Let's dive into it. First up, let's talk The Matrix 4, which has cast one of the stars from Aquaman. HD, what do we know?
Yahya Abdul-Mateen II has been cast in The Matrix 4, which is set to see Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss reprising their roles as Neo and Trinity, as well as Lana Wachowski returning to direct. There is no word on who Yahya Abdul-Mateen II will be playing yet, but there have been rumors that have been debunked that he'll be playing a young Morpheus. However,
HT, he is black, so he must be related to Morpheus, right?
Yeah, it's like how every brunette woman must be Rey's mom in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he is not playing young Morpheus, but according to Variety reporter Justin Kroll, he may be playing a character who's connected to Morpheus. We don't know yet whether Lawrence Fishburne will be returning in the role of the character in The Matrix 4, but it seems feasible that he would, and if not, then perhaps Yahya Abdul-Mateen II's character will be bridging that gap.
We have to assume that Lawrence Fishburne's going to return because, like, everybody else is returning. You think if Keanu is returning, he would be returning, right?
Yeah, you'd think so, unless they have plans to off Morpheus, perhaps, or have something mysterious happen, which is why we have a character connected to him potentially appearing in the role.
This could be the search for Morpheus. This could be Star Wars The Force Awakens all over again.
Yeah, and Morpheus will just be like on a deserted island drinking milk.
What is your feelings on Abdul-Mateen? Like, actually, when you say his last name, do you have to say both of the hyphen? I'm guessing you do, right?
Yes, you do, because it's hyphenated.
What is your opinion on him?
I really like him. I think he was so charismatic in Aquaman. I remember we had that conversation where he kind of felt like the real villain of Aquaman, although his narrative was actually a little bit not very connected to the overall plot. But he was just very charismatic and fun to watch, and he's been appearing in everything. I remember seeing him in Us, for a very short screen time, but he also was memorable in that. And then, of course, I got to see him in the new Watchmen pilot, which he played opposite Regina King, and he's just showing up everywhere. And I'm excited to see him again. I think he's just got a very strong screen presence, and I'm excited to see where he's going from here.
Yeah, well, excited.
He's going to be in the new Candy Man too.
Yes, that's true.
Well, excited to see him as Morpheus's son in Matrix 4. A joke. Or maybe I don't know. Chris, we've been talking about this Masters of the Universe movie for so long. Actually, probably before you started at Slash Film, I've been writing about this, the chance of them making a live action Masters of the Universe reboot for, I think, over 10 years now, actually. If I think of it right, like David Goyer was attached at one point. There's been a lot of people attached to it, and now it looks like it's finally happening, but might go straight to Netflix.
Right. So Sony has been trying to develop this since at least 2007, and it's changed hands several times, and now they've locked down writers, they've locked down directors, they've locked down a star, and at the moment it's slated for a March 2021 release date. However, there is now a report over at THR, which comes from quote-unquote insiders who are saying that Sony is very seriously mulling over the idea of just pretty much dumping this onto Netflix rather than risk some sort of box office failure. Sony has had sort of a weird year. I mean, they have, they're connected to Spider-Man, obviously, so they have that going for them, but they also had the new Men in Black movie, and that bombed. Like no one wanted to see that. And so we're in this sort of weird landscape right now where anything that isn't like a superhero movie is sort of up in the air. Like
but
even like
Masters of the Universe is a superhero movie. It's a guy with superpowers and a gigantic sword.
I know, but people don't really. I don't think people think of this as a superhero. They think of it more of as like a fantasy thing. I think that's what I think, at least.
See, maybe they should have approached it like a superhero movie because Prince Adam is totally like Clark Kent without the powers, and then he gets the sword and he becomes the master of the universe.
I guess it just seems like there's such a weird. I don't know. The Hollywood landscape right now is very weird, where even tried and true franchises aren't a sure thing. And Sony, they want this to be a franchise, but they're worried about releasing another dud, and they can sort of get around that by just dropping this on Netflix. And it sort of makes kind of sense because Netflix has She-Ra, which is connected to Masters of the Universe, and they have the upcoming Kevin Smith anime He-Man, so it would sort of fit in nicely with that. And it looks like more and more studios are going to start taking this approach. I mean, Paramount already did this with the Cloverfield Paradox, which was supposed to go to theaters, and they just ended up dropping it onto Netflix as sort of a surprise for right after the Super Bowl. And Paramount is actually developing a whole division that's devoted to sort of just offloading movies onto Netflix. So we've sort of come full circle here because, for a while, studios saw Netflix as the enemy, and now they're realizing that, streaming isn't going away, and they're sort of taking a if you can't beat them, join them approach, where it's like, all right, we're not going to be able to beat streaming at their own game. Let's get in on this and, start making money.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't see, studios like Paramount making movies for Netflix is a bad idea. I mean, obviously, most of them are probably going to be making movies for their own streaming service to try to entice people to subscribe to that. But is Netflix in danger after, the Cloverfield Paradox and now potentially this, as being seen as the dumping ground of bad movies that studios don't want?
It's weird because, on one level, yes, they do have this sort of reputation for junk. They have Bright, even though everyone watched that apparently, but but at the same time, they also have really big prestige stuff. I mean, they had Roma last year, they have The Irishman this year, and Marriage Story. So it's I think they're sort of trying to have everything over there at Netflix where yes, they're going to have junk, but they're also going to try and counterbalance it with these really well-regarded adult movies that probably wouldn't do well in theaters anymore just because that's the way things go right now, but at least they're still getting made. I mean, they gave Martin Scorsese his biggest budget ever to make The Irishman, and in my humble opinion, it paid off. But we'll have to see how everyone else reacts to it when everyone else is able to see it. But it's like a give or take. Yeah, they're going to have absolute dreck, but they're also going to have good stuff too.
At the same time, it's interesting to see Netflix also, for years and years now, they've been trying to diversify their content so much and try to entice people to subscribe to Netflix. And now I feel like we're starting to see a change in that where they are trying to create content that will keep their current subscribers around. Like you mentioned how, Netflix has She-Ra. They're going to have the He-Man cartoon, and now they're creating this. I feel like everybody that's already in for Masters of the Universe is probably already a Netflix subscriber, but this will be more content for them to keep on paying that monthly fee, which is kind of interesting. But let's move over to ABC. They're developing a TV series, Inland, which is being adapted by Drew Goddard. What do we know about this, HJ?
Yeah, Drew Goddard is returning to TV for his next project. He's adapting an Inland TV series based on the best-selling Western epic novel by Taya Obret, who wrote The Tiger's Wife. And this is part of his deal that he originally signed with 20th Century Fox TV, but now has been migrated to ABC Studios after the Disney-Fox merger. And it's an adaptation for ABC's Signature, which is the cable and streaming division of Disney TV Studios. So potentially you will be seeing it on this streaming service or a streaming service of some sort. So it all seems up in the air right now. But Inland is a Western epic that follows the two intersecting storylines of two characters, one of which is a frontierswoman who's awaiting the return of her husband and sons, and the other of which is a former outlaw who is haunted by ghosts, literal and figurative.
Have you read this book?
I have not, but it sounds interesting. It sounds up Drew Goddard's alley. He, was a writer on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel before he made his breakout feature debut with Cabin in the Woods, and recently directed the Bad Times at the El Royale. So he's a action series with a supernatural twist is definitely something that he would be successful with.
Is this something you think is right for ABC? Like, I feel like this sounds more like an HBO kind of. Maybe that's because I'm like in the mind of like HBO has Westworld, but I don't know.
It does sound really ambitious for ABC, especially ABC Signature, which I'm still not quite sure what it is. It seems like something that is meant for streaming, so it's something that is very ambitious and potentially very blockbuster sized, going for a streaming platform. So I'm not sure how it will turn out, but I like Drew Goddard, and I think that he has created really interesting and really compelling stuff. So I might tune in. Maybe I'll check out the book. I actually hadn't heard of it until I was writing up this piece, but it seems like an interesting series, or interesting book, sorry.
Yeah. Let's move on. Let's talk about Ang Lee's Gemini Man, which we talked about yesterday on the podcast during the water cooler. I think we were all not, huge fans of it. But it turns out, Ang Lee shot this movie in a format that is not going to be widely available in theaters. Chris, what do we know?
Right. So this is a little technical. I'll try to dumb it down for everyone out there, because even when I was writing this, I had to keep checking notes to make sure I was getting this right. So here's the deal. Ang Lee shot this film in 3D 4K 120 frames per second. The 120 frames per second is the high frame rate, which I think everyone is aware of. It's what, the Hobbit movies were shot in. I think Avatar is maybe shooting in that, the sequels. So here's where things get complicated. No theater in America is able to show this film in that exact format. The best we can do here in the States is 3D 124 frames per second, but in 2K. So everything is there except the 4K. Now, if you don't know what this stuff is, that might sound like a trivial difference, but 4K and 2K, there is a big difference there in terms of quality and pixels and presentation and all that jazz. So, Ang Lee, he went through a lot of trouble to shoot this film in this specific format, and apparently he went through all that trouble for no good reason, because no one is going to be able to show this film that way. There are some theaters that will be able to show it in 4K, but not with the 3D high frame rate. And so it's like there's nothing we can really do here. The best you can do is there are 14 theaters in the US, and they're listed in our story, that are showing it in 3D 120 2K. So, even that is sort of like a small amount of, compared to all the theaters in the country. So
yeah,
you're sort of like damned if you do, damned if you don't here with this film. And I don't know.
How many theaters do you think are going to have this format available when Avatar 2 hits theaters?
God, I don't know.
I feel like James Cameron gets the exhibitors to, update their equipment.
Do you think James Cameron will ever even finish the Avatar sequel? That's the real question here. Yeah. I feel like, but we're like 5 years from now, we're gonna be like, that still hasn't come out yet. What happened to Avatar 2?
Yeah. By the way, yesterday on the podcast, I was talking about Gemini Man, and I made a little bit of an error, like a couple different bits of error. One of our listeners, John C., wrote in to correct those, and I want to just read them right here. I mentioned that Marvel does this de-aging effect much better than what Gemini Man did with Will Smith's character, and apparently what Gemini Man did is not the same thing as Marvel films, where they're de-aging the actors playing themselves. In Gemini Man, they are actually completely creating a digital character. This person says it's similar to creating Alita in Battle Angel. So it's a different process, and that's probably why it looks a lot different. And the other thing I probably said incorrectly was I said that I saw the first Hobbit film in 120 frames per second. That is incorrect. I saw the first Hobbit film in 48 frames per second. Yes, I think the first 120 frames per second movie was the other Ang Lee film. What is that? The Halftime
Billy
Walk?
Lynn's
Oh, yeah.
long halftime walk.
Billy Lynn's No One Saw This Movie.
Yeah. Anyways, so there's that. But if you have a 120 second theater around you, maybe you should check this out just to see what it looks like. Or if you, maybe you shouldn't. So I don't know.
Go see a good movie instead. There's some good movies playing right now. Go see that.
Parasite.
Yeah, Parasite.
Yes, go see Parasite if that's playing anywhere near you. I don't even know if that's opening wide or not. It might be limited.
Okay.
I think it is.
Let's talk about another cinema luminary. Let's talk about Francis Ford Coppola, who is one step closer to making his passion project, Megalopolis. HT, what do we know?
I think it's Megalopolis, but either way, it's a tongue twister.
Okay.
Yes,
Megalopolis.
Yes. Francis Ford Coppola has recently signed with one of the industry's largest agencies, CAA, in hopes that they'll help finance his super expensive futuristic movie that's been in the works for many years now. So he's recently joined the agency's ranks, and this will potentially help him get Megalopolis off the ground after nearly 20 years. This is his 212-page script, which follows an architect that tries to build a mini utopia within a futuristic New York City. So this is a film that he's been trying to get in the works for a while, and there hasn't been any updates specifically on this film yet, but with the signing with CAA, this will hopefully be the first step in getting that off the ground.
And for those who don't know, a page of script time, it kind of equates to 1 minute of screen time. So 212-page script equates to like 3.5 hour movie, probably. Maybe. So that's a long movie. That's probably what's kept him from making this for such a long time. But he also is a, filmmaker who's made lots of long, epic movies that are considered some of the greatest films of all time. Why is it taking him so long to make this, HG?
I think it's just because it's such a technically heavy movie, because it takes place in a futuristic New York City, and it also has to do with the rebuilding of New York after a disastrous incident. It was written back in 2001, so the 9/11 attacks were really fresh in people's minds, and that ended up putting the script on hold. And I think it's just the ambition and the grand scale of it all made it a hard project to get off the ground.
Yeah. Chris, are you a fan of Francis Ford Coppola's work?
I am. I mean, he hasn't done anything good in a long time. I think like the last movie of his that I consider to be genuinely good is probably Dracula, which is like 1992. But he is, he sort of earned his reputation as one of the best filmmakers, and a lot of his early work, not just The Godfather, but The Conversation and Apocalypse Now, all that stuff. They're some of the best American movies ever made. So I would love for him to have sort of like this return where he comes back and makes a big epic and shows us all he still has it. But it's just sort of like I'll believe it when I see it thing.
I kind of have this theory that usually like filmmakers start their careers like in film school making like these experimental films, and then as they progress their careers they get more narrative and based and more story based, less experimental, I should say. And I feel like the Northern California filmmakers, like the George Lucas and the Francis Ford Coppola, are going backwards in time. Do you know what I mean? Like in their early careers, they have made like some of the biggest films of all time that are considered, that people look at for their screenplays and, how to create like 3-act structure and whatever, they
narrative masterpieces.
Yeah, blockbuster masterpieces. And then later in their careers, they've devolved makes it sound bad, but they've taken a more experimental approach to their careers, which I personally do not love, but I don't know. It's interesting that both of them have kind of taken that turn with their careers. But anyways, okay, let's talk about Joker, because we're talking about that all week here. And, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding this film. With the violence, what does the film have to say, and also Todd Phillips can't keep his mouth shut and says some things that gets himself in trouble. That happened. What was it, last week, Chris?
I think it was either last week or the week before.
Yeah. What did he say?
All right, I'm not going to read the full quote because I don't want to, but I'm going to read. Here's how the quote starts. Go try to be funny nowadays with this woke culture. And that's where I'm going to stop because just shut up, Todd Phillips. But basically the gist of his quote is no one can be funny anymore because, everyone's too woke and cancel culture and so on and so forth.
Everybody's too PC, so you can't make a joke about anything.
Right. But basically, his argument is the only way you can be funny is if you're offensive, and we're not allowed to be offensive anymore. So there's no more comedy. That's the Todd Phillips argument.
And now,
comedy is dead.
Yes. R.I.P. comedy.
Yeah. Actor Marc Maron, who, is a comedian. He runs a popular podcast that you probably may have heard of, and he stars in The Joker, disagrees with Todd Phillips. What does he say in response?
Right. And again, I'm not going to read the full quote because Marc Maron's quote is kind of lengthy because he's one of those guys who really likes to talk. But basically, he calls bullshit on what Todd Phillips is saying. And he boils it down to this where, the only thing that's sort of like looked down upon now is punching down on people for the sake of being mean, basically, where it's like Marc Maron's argument is like you can still be offensive if it's actually funny. Like if there's actually comedy in the offensiveness, then you can do that. But if you're just being mean for the sake of being mean, that's not really funny to begin with. And that's really what people have the most problem with. And I kind of think that's correct, honestly. Like, it's kind of stupid to be like, comedy is dead, because there's plenty of great comedy out there right now. So,
So is it just the case that Todd Phillips is just a mean, insensitive person?
I don't know. I don't want to. I don't know him on a personal level. I do think he has a very nihilistic outlook on things based on the Joker and the Hangover movies, which are very mean-spirited, and that seems to be what he gravitates towards. But he could be a perfectly nice person in real life.
Yeah. It's an interesting argument. I mean, this is something I know Todd Phillips got a lot of flack for this, but this has been an argument that has been going on in the comedy scene for the last 5 years or something. Like, this has been something that some comedians feel is they can't go to colleges anymore and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm curious to see what the future of comedy is, because I definitely don't agree with Todd Phillips, but I do agree that people are getting more sensitive to certain things. It's like, what can you make a joke about and what can't you make a joke about? But I think as a comedian, it's your job to write jokes, then you need to spend some time thinking about, is this an okay joke to make? What does this say about me as a person? What does this say about us as a society? What are we trying to say with this joke? I mean, I guess maybe Todd Phillips has a problem thinking about that in general.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, HC, do you have anything to say to this argument?
dumb.
It's dumb. Yeah.
No, what I will say is that comedy changes, as does society, and that I think that the comedy that Todd Phillips grew up and was raised on in the 80s specifically may have not been the most amiable type of comedy or the most legal in a lot of senses. So I will say that it makes sense that he thinks this way. I think he's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, Todd Phillips has made a career out of offensive humor, things that are like kind of over the top. What is like the most offensive thing in like The Hangover, Chris? Can you recall?
I can't. I mean,
probably something to do with the baby, right? I'm sure there's some stuff that today would be like looked really down upon.
I mean, I honestly barely remember that movie. I saw it in theaters, and that was it. I never even saw the sequels, but I just remember it being particularly mean-spirited, especially like Bradley Cooper's character is just like this huge like asshole through the whole movie. So I don't know. I think it's just there's a fine line you can walk, and there's nothing wrong with being offensive if the offensiveness has something to say. That's sort of like the best way I can put it. Like you got to go back.
But what if the offensiveness says that I'm a racist asshole?
Then that's bad, and you should not be doing it. That's really, I think that should be the line right there. If the joke is, look at how offensive and racist and sexist I am, then that stinks, and it's not really that funny, and you need to work on better material.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find the links to the stories we've mentioned on today's podcast linked in the show notes. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please rate and read this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.